He's about 455 yards away. He's going to hit about a 2-iron, I think.
This is the School of Motion podcast. Come for the MoGraph, stay for the puns. Hello, everyone. Today, I'm really excited because we have Justin Cohn of Motionographer on this. I guess I'm going to start calling it a podcast. So if you have had any experience in MoGraph or motion design, whatever you want to call it, you are familiar with Motionographer. It's been around since 2006. It has influenced and inspired everybody in this generation of motion designers. And, you know, as someone who's in my mid-30s and I came up in the industry around the early 2000s, I've watched it grow. And over the last year, I've actually gotten to know Justin a little bit. And Justin is one of the most professional and brilliant people I've ever met. And I really wanted to pick his brain about Motionographer. Specifically, what's going on with it now, 10 years later. There's a lot of new faces on the site you may have noticed. Joe Donaldson, Lillian Darmono, Noel Honig, among others. There's a lot of neat new kinds of content they're putting out. And for those in the know, there is also a big announcement coming very soon about something called the Motion Awards. Justin will talk about it in this conversation with me, and the Motion Awards, I believe, are probably going to be the premier award for motion designers in our industry. This is the first year they're going to be happening. It's going to be incredibly exciting, and we get into what he thinks is going to constitute award-winning work. What even makes work good? Have you ever thought about that? Like, why is something good and why is something else not good? And I was expecting his answer to be really kind of vague and formless, but he actually had almost a bullet-pointed list of what makes work good, what makes work bad. So it's an awesome conversation with an awesome person. I hope you enjoy it. And before we get into it, I just want to remind you, we are going to talk about a lot of resources and things like that in this episode. You can find all of those in a nice little convenient list that we like to call show notes at schoolofmotion.com. So head on over there. You'll also be able to find other interviews and podcast episodes, articles, and tons of free motion design lessons. And if you're so inclined, you can also get information on our training courses such as Design Bootcamp, Animation Bootcamp, the new Rigging Academy course we just launched, which is very popular. All of that and more is at schoolofmotion.com. You can sign up for a free student account, which will let you download actual project files and assets from the lessons as you watch them on the site, plus a bunch of other neat things. So that's all I'm going to say about that. And now let's go talk to Justin Cohn. All right, Justin Cohn, thank you so much, man, for coming on and chatting with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor and a pleasure.
You know, to have you tell me it's an honor to talk to me, this is like, little 23-year-old Joey's getting a little tinkle. So I want to talk first a little bit about what's going on over at Motionographer. I'm sure, everyone listening is familiar with Motionographer. It's been around for years. It's this cornerstone of the industry. But there's been a lot of changes over there, starting with back, I think in May, you did a Patreon campaign. And I wanted to just check in, see how that's going and find out kind of why you decided to go that route.
Yeah, so that's right. I think it was May when we launched the Patreon campaign. And for people who aren't aware, Patreon is kind of like Kickstarter, except it's like a monthly thing. So you contribute over time instead of just, one lump sum. So you can sign up and be like, I want to give, $2 a month to Motionographer, or a lot of people give like $50 a month, depending on, how valuable they think it is to them. And so we started that. The reason that I think we were drawn to Patreon as a way to kind of unlock more potential for Motionographer was the one, it's consistent, it's over time. You can count on, okay, month to month, we're going to, have this much money coming in from the community. And so you can actually plan things, you can plan content, you can plan hirings of people and that kind of thing. With Kickstarter and other forms of crowdfunding, it's one lump sum and it's really hard to manage that. So that's kind of a boring logistical reason for going with Patreon. But the other thing I like about Patreon is the kind of community aspect of it. They really encourage updates and different kinds of interaction with your patrons. So it just worked well with what we were already doing with Motionographer. And because of the campaign, we have been able to hire a part-time editor for the first time ever in the 10-year history of Motionographer, we're actually paying somebody to function as an editor. And that person is Joe Donaldson. People probably know his name. Well, he's been posting more on the site because that's part of his job. But Joe was also an art director at Buck in LA. Before that, he worked all over the place at Digital Kitchen. He was a freelancer in New York. He was a director on the Not to Scale roster. And he's just an awesome guy. He's really plugged in. He's super smart, super ambitious. And so Patreon has enabled us to have him be an editor. And an editor, by the way, if you're thinking that's somebody who checks spelling and that kind of thing. Now that's a copy editor, and we don't have one of those, as you can tell if you read the site. He's actually really, Joe is pretty much at the same level that I am. He's finding new content, finding new people to contribute to the site, writing. And he and I have different takes on things. Like I really like a lot of CG work. I like really high polished work. Joe likes a lot of like kind of bespoke, like 2D kind of more like handmade work. So we kind of complement each other well. And I'm super, super grateful to the Patreon community that we've been able to have him on board. So yeah, that's the Patreon piece. And I'm really, really grateful that it's still going and working out well for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I definitely want to get into a little bit later what you just talked about, those interesting sort of art directions and styles, that we see all the time on Motionographer. But, I'm looking at the Patreon page, and I remember when it came out, there were goals, it works just like Kickstarter. You sort of tell people, if we reach this dollar amount, this is what we'll be able to do. If we reach this dollar amount, we'll be able to do this. And you had some really lofty goals on there, and I'm just,
they're still there. They're like buried somewhere.
Yeah. So, and I wanted to, just kind of get a gut check from you, like, what in your head was this successful? Because you actually, I think as of this morning when I did my research, I think you were up to like almost $2,700 a month in patronage, which is pretty amazing. But I know that if you had been able to get up to say, $10,000 a month or something like that, I mean, you'd be able to hire a web developer and all these other things. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on like, was this a success? Would you have done anything differently? And is it making you rethink your strategy for the site?
Sure. That's great. So the goals that we had on Patreon really existed long before the Patreon campaign ever launched. And so the first goal was something like, hire an editor. And the second goal is there's a lot about hiring people and getting the team bigger. And then there's other goals that are about, creating a kind of a consistent and authoritative industry survey and multiple surveys every year, so we could figure out, salaries and demographics and even hardware and software trends, but have it really well quantified. So we had a lot of these goals, or other ones too, that existed before Patreon. And when we launched Patreon, we thought, well, we might as well aim high and see what happens. It's an experimental thing for us to even, be on Patreon. And so we've kind of plateaued, as you said, around $2,600, I think, right now. And I think there's some reasons for that. If you look at the people who do really, really well, and there are some people who make $30,000 plus a month on Patreon. If you look at those people, for the most part, they create episodic content. So people who create, a video series, or who create a really popular podcast, or who create, I think one of the top ones is like people who create adult video games. So they're tapping into a whole different
you're in the wrong niche, man. You're in the wrong industry.
Tell me about it, man. But and I think that makes sense, because there's a real clear, like, kind of dollar for dollar match there of people's perception of the value they're getting translates to this regular production of content. So we have that, kind of going against us. And if you look at other sites like ours that are on Patreon, like Art of the Title, Grayscale Gorilla, they're all kind of in the lower end in terms of how much you're getting per month. And so I'm really happy with where we are, because I think relative to the other creators on Patreon who are doing what we're doing really, really well. Having said that, like, anytime and this is advice for anybody who's thinking about going on Patreon or Kickstarter or whatever, but whenever you have one of these like crowdfunding campaign kind of things, and you hit a plateau as we have, you have to ask yourself, okay, could we increase the number of people? Could we increase the amount of money that people are giving each month? If so, how much work and time will that take? And then the big question is, do the little math there, and is it worth it, right? So in any project, this is true for business in general, but you have to decide, like, are we going to get a good return on the investment of time and energy that we put into this? So right now, we put a certain amount of effort and time into our Patreon community, and it's manageable because it's just me and Joe part-time, really, that are kind of doing everything, as well as a few other volunteer writers. If I would start putting more and more energy into boosting patronage on Patreon, it would start carving into what we're getting the support for in the first place, which is, creating content and resources for people in the industry. So it would be cannibalizing, in other words, ourselves, and we don't want to do that. So, I'm really happy with where it is right now. And we've been able to actually hire Joe earlier than I thought we'd be able to. Originally, that goal was at $5,000. And eventually I'd like to get there, and maybe we'll just have to pay for that some other way. But it's been really helpful for me, just to kind of have a clearer vision of where Motionographer is going to go, because every month on Patreon, we do a monthly update, and that's a time when I tell everybody in the Patreon community, okay, here's what we've achieved, here's what we're trying to do next. And just having to do that every month is great for me. It keeps me on track. It kind of tells me where we're falling short, and it's a good reality check. I hope that kind of helps clear it up a little.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there was like a lot of great little nuggets in there of advice just about business in general. And frankly, one of the things that I hope people would take away from it, because, being in charge of a site like Motionographer, at this point, it's, I'm sure feels like a big responsibility. And it's your livelihood and everything. And doing the Patreon thing, it probably felt really scary and risky. And it worked out like fairly well, maybe not as well as you'd hope, but right. I think that's great that you did it, because that's how. And there's a lot of correlations I think I'm finding between business and just sort of the creative side. Like, you take risks knowing that it might not go the way you want, but now think of how much you've learned in the meantime. So doing my little back of the envelope math here, I'm trying to figure out how much this Patreon campaign has earned from Motionographer, and I'm coming up with maybe somewhere between like $10,000 and $11,000 since the beginning. So most of that has gone to paying Joe, which obviously I've noticed there is a constant stream of new content on Motionographer, which is very hard to do, and it's really high quality content. Is that really where the bulk of that revenue has gone? Okay.
It almost covers all of our expenses. So $2,600 a month right now is what we're at on Patreon. That covers Joe and our hosting. We have a bunch of other little tiny expenses, little services like font hosting for the website, things like that. They add up. So it's basically helping us break even. But more important than that, what it allows is for me to step back from the day-to-day of running Motionographer, let Joe do more of that, focus on the content production. And I can look and say, okay, what's the next thing we should be doing? And how are we going to do it? That's super, super important to me. So it's unlocking a much greater potential, I think, for Motionographer than was ever possible without it.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that because there's a lot. I mean, you're still doing content for the site, but it seems like most of the content is coming from Joe, and now you've got Lillian, and I see Noel Honig on there every once in a while, and it's really awesome. So on that note, what has this freed you up to work on? What are some of the things that we haven't seen going on behind the scenes on Motionographer?
Yeah. So the new content you're mentioning, like, and the new contributors, like, a lot of that's, Joe's stuff. Joe had ideas about monthly guest articles from people in the community. And Lillian Dormano had the idea for Spectrum, which is a series. It's kind of like looking at people who are outside the normal kind of mainstream rock star motion design world. And so we've just been encouraging those ideas and letting them kind of take on a life of their own. Like, we just published another step-by-step piece. Step-by-step is Joe's idea of, like, we all we've all seen tutorials that are great for learning like a specific technique or aspect of a project. But there's a lot to be said for just looking over somebody's shoulder as they work and do their thing. So the one that went live today was from Locked and Loading. David, I can't remember how to pronounce his last name.
It's David Brodeur. Yeah.
Brodeur.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's just like you're watching him make one of his scenes from start to finish. And it's super interesting to watch. So yeah, we're letting those things go and kind of take on a life of their own. And we have more ideas for that stuff in the future. But the big thing that it's let me focus on was what to do next. And I thought initially the thing that we needed to do next was build a credit system, like a really kind of like an IMDb style credit system for motion design and for animation. And I still think that's super important. And ultimately, that's the next thing that I want to make. But what I did, I went down a rabbit hole where I started working on that. You know, Joe was focusing on the day-to-day stuff, and I started building out this tool, and I realized that it was going to be harder and take more coding prowess than I currently possess. And so I had this choice to make. I was like, well, I can work on this for the next 18 months and make like glacial progress, or we can work on something else in our kind of hopper, our list of projects that might actually enable us to build this credit system in a different way, where we can actually, you know, hire people and work with people who are, you know, full-time coders all the time who actually know what they're doing. And so we looked at our list of projects, and one that we've been wanting to do for a long time is an awards show. Carlos, my business partner and really the co-founder of Motionographer and the F5 Festival, he's been talking about doing an award show for a long time because he's been frustrated with what's out there. And he was an executive at NBC Universal for many years and at ABC before that. So I always pushed back. I was like, I don't know, an award show, it seems kind of lame. I don't really want to do that. And then I started talking to people about it out in the community, and everyone was like, yeah, no, there should be an award show. Really, there needs to be one. And I thought, okay, so I started doing research, and I got some people to help, you know, doing some research on what's out there, and we dug in it. And the more that we dug into it, the more we realized there's a real need for this in our community. And so we chose that to be the next project that we're going to do. And so we're launching very soon in December. We're going to be launching the Motion Awards by Motionographer. And I'm really excited about that. It's a lot of work in many ways. It's like starting a whole new kind of nonprofit entity, but I think it's worth doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's that's an understatement. It's a huge, huge job to put on an award show. You know, even a small one. I mean, the first time you do it, I'm sure you're, you know, up to your neck in branding and categories and all that. So, can you tell us where did the genesis of this come from? Like where, you know, why another award show? You know, like why do we need that?
Because some people have kind of responded with that rhetorical question, like why another award show? And the kind of unstated thing there is like, oh, there's just so many, you know.
Right.
But when you actually look at what's out there, it's kind of abysmal, like for motion design at least, and certain kinds of animation. So there's this perception there's all these amazing shows out there, but for motion design, it's like for most of them, it's just like a single category.
Like shoehorned in there, you know?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the Emmys, for instance, like the Emmys that's, you know, one of the largest award shows in the United States, at least. And it's long had the title design category, which is motion design, but that's it. And it's a great, I mean, it's a really authoritative award for that one narrow aspect of motion design. But as we all know, motion design goes way beyond just titles, and it goes beyond television, which the Emmys is also limited to. So you can maybe look at some other places like the ADCs, the Art Directors Club, right? They have a motion category, and I've judged that before. I was actually one of the first judges for that category. But it's focused on advertising because it's the ADCs, and the winners are all agencies. It's hard to even find studios listed as winners. And the whole thing, if you look at the winners for motion, it's kind of confusing. It's like, what are these categories again? How does this work? There's ProMax BDA, which has been around for a really long time. ProMax BDA is more for TV marketing and graphics. There's some others, but basically there's no one award show that I feel kind of celebrates the full potential of motion design. And there's so many areas that motion design has worked its way into. And a lot of those don't have, there's not any award show period that shines a spotlight on some of these newer areas. So if you look in like the role that motion design has played in UI development, app development, VR, AR, kind of exciting places there. But even just looking at like the power of a visual essay, right? There's not really an award show out there that's saying, hey, visual essays and explainer videos, those are a thing and they're important and we want to celebrate them. So we're going to do that. That's the idea, is basically like try as hard as we can with a lot of people helping to celebrate the full potential of motion design because nobody else is doing it.
That's awesome. And I totally agree with you. I was kind of researching before we talked today and I was looking at all the other award shows, and it really does feel like, the Emmys, they've taken this tiny sliver of motion design and shoehorned it in. But there's another thing too. I'm curious. I want to get your take on this. Other award shows, every award show has a culture to it, and the Emmys feel like television, right? And ADC feels like advertising. And if you've ever been around ad agencies, you know what that culture is. But there hasn't been anything that really speaks to motion designers. I might even use the word Motionographer here, because to me, when I think of like, industries having a certain culture, and maybe it's just because I'm in my 30s, but I think back to like the MoGraph.net heyday, and there was kind of this vibe around all this stuff that like, hey, we're kind of on the cutting edge and no one really understands how this cool stuff's getting done. Let's try to figure it out. And I haven't ever seen that in award shows. So I'm curious, like, obviously the categories and the breadth of work you want to feature in this award show are going to be tailored to how diverse motion design is now. But is there also going to be sort of this aspect of it's, for motion designers by motion designers, like a cultural
absolutely
thing?
That's really the I think one of the most important things about it is this is for the people who are actually making this stuff, right? This is not for agencies or big clients, although now they are increasingly making stuff too. They have in-house teams. But this is really for people who are making the stuff, pushing the pixels, setting the keyframes. And so already that's a cultural difference from many of the other award shows where the people who are getting the award are like several degrees removed from, the Wacom tablet that actually made the thing happen. And so that's a big difference. This is for makers, by makers. Every judge is directly involved in the creation of motion design and animation. Even the people who are teaching and stuff, they're teaching in that field and for the student categories. So everybody's directly involved. We purposely didn't include producers and executive producers as judges, even though I think they're incredibly valuable and have a really valuable perspective to offer. Everybody is a designer, art director, animator, that kind of thing, because that's how we're going to differentiate ourselves, and that is the culture that we're serving. Whether or not that's going to match some existing culture that we've seen online before, I don't know. We've got 120 judges, and they really represent the culture of the awards, and they're from all over the map. Some of them are kind of like old school Mographers, old school being like early 2000s. Some go back further than that.
Ancient.
The ancient. I know. That's when I got into this game too. But many of them are not, from that world. They're, animators and people that might be more described as, designers or illustrators or something, who have a different background, who might come from, the Royal College of Art, which has been producing an incredible array of people who've translated their skills into motion design. And so I'd like to think there's a kind of a group of cultures that are going to be represented, but they're all bound by the fact that they're makers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no. And I think that's a brilliant move because, I want to talk to you in a little bit about this. One of the things that I've noticed is there are kind of some tastemakers in the industry. And what that does, and you've even talked about this before, this idea of confirmation bias, it creates this perception that is probably not accurate, that there's a certain style of work that is like, popular right now. And that's what people want. And that's probably what's going to win awards, when in reality, that's just kind of, it's almost like the MoGraph version of what just happened with the US elections, where if you live inside the bubble and you only look at Wine After Coffee, you might think that that's what all the work looks like. So let me ask you about the judges, because you mentioned 120 judges, which is a shitload, if I may put it bluntly. Yeah. So how come you need so many judges?
Yeah, well, to combat what you were just describing, it's one of the main reasons. So if you look down the list, you'll see a lot of the rock stars and the tastemakers. You're going to see Jorge, from Wine After Coffee, Claudio Salas. You'll also see Daniel Savage and Brian Goss, a bunch of people that are active in the community and some of, rock star kind of people. They're important, but then they're also going to be countered by a lot of names that you may not be familiar with. But as soon as you look at their CVs or their resumes, you're going to realize that, oh, wow, this person's been a creative director for 20 years and has 5 Emmys, under their belt or whatever. We have this range to provide basically diversity of opinion, and also to not give any single judge too much power. This, I hope, and this is something that, this is a page we took out of the book of some of the other older award shows, like the Emmys, for instance. They have a board of governors, and they have tons and tons of judges across their categories. And it's a way of kind of distributing power and keeping things as fair as you possibly can have it, and not letting one style or perspective dominate the judging. We also have 2 rounds of judging. The first round is a shortlist round. So one group of judges will go through and basically say in or out, this piece goes to the next round. And then in the finalist round, a different group of judges then looks at that work. So again, that takes more judges to have 2 rounds. So that's another reason we have 120 judges.
Cool. And what are the criteria that they'll be judging on? Is it just like a gut thing, like you like it or you don't, or are you trying to standardize it a little bit?
So we're going to strike a balance, I think. I mean, the emphasis is on craftsmanship. This is an award show for people who are actually making stuff, as I said before, so not agencies or clients, unless they actually made the stuff themselves. So with that in mind, you have to look at execution. This can't just be about a good idea. It has to be beautifully brought to life. But there's a lot of freedom for the judges to bring their own personal interpretation of what good means and what kind of work should win. I want them to bring their own definitions of good to bear. And so I've judged a lot of competitions in the past, and it really bothers me when I jump into the judging and they're like, okay, here are the criteria for good work, bullet 1, bullet 2, bullet 3. And I'm like, whoa, I've been looking at work for 15, 20 years. So I kind of have my own definition of good. Isn't that why you want me to judge this thing? So we're going to encourage a diversity of opinions about good, knowing that means, judges will clash and disagree, and sub-judges are probably going to be wanting us to give them more criteria about what is good. But that's why we have 120 judges, is to get them kind of, defining it for themselves and putting their own mark or stamp of approval on the work.
So that brings up a really interesting point. So this is something I was thinking about recently, because, if anyone has listened to me ramble on these podcasts before, I bring Buck up at least once an episode. I feel like they're like my favorite studio times a million. And they recently came out with this piece. It was an intro to a David Blaine show. And to me, when I saw it, I remember, I think it was 2-3 years ago when G-Monk came out with that piece Box. It was with the Bot and Dolly thing. And I saw that and I knew instantly that it was probably my favorite thing I'd ever seen. And then when this David Blaine piece came out, I had that same feeling. But if you look, I couldn't put my finger on why, because if you look at Buck's work, they have 15 other things that look just like the David Blaine thing. These really beautiful, cell animated, crazy transitions and really great sound from Ant Food and really good design. So why was that piece so good? And I'm curious, because you've seen more work than probably anyone out there, because you've just been curating it for years. Do you have any idea like what it is that makes certain pieces good? Because as someone who was like an After Effects artist, Cinema 4D artist, I'm always looking at the technical stuff. However, I've seen things from like Gretel is a good example where it's so simple. Execution wise, there's not much going on, but it's still amazing. And why? Like, why is it amazing?
It's such a good question. It's one I've thought about a lot, but never really publicly. So here we go. I think it's actually helpful to start with what makes bad work, because it's easier to kind of agree on that. And when you define what makes bad work, it kind of through negative space shows you what makes good work. So let's start about that. So we could say bad work doesn't communicate its message clearly or create the intended emotional impact that, you know, that you're trying to create. So, now, I should caveat all this or preempt all this by saying I'm talking about design here. I'm not talking about art. That's a whole different conversation. But I'm talking about design because that's really what I have spent my time looking at. So bad work doesn't communicate clearly. It doesn't create that intended emotional impact. And you know, this could be a message for a client that you're trying to communicate. It could be your own personal message that you're trying to communicate. Bad work uses the wrong techniques or the wrong aesthetics for the job at hand, right? So like an ad for handmade pottery from Mexico probably shouldn't feature like photoreal CG robots doing the dishes, right? It just doesn't make sense to have like some super high polished thing when you're talking about this earthy pottery made from Mexico, right?
Right.
So that would be bad work. Bad work is forgettable. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We can talk about that in a second. Bad work contains technical flaws, as you were talking about. You know, technical stuff is important. Bad work contains technical flaws that distract from the core intent of the project. So what do I mean by that? If your animation is so poor, right, that the viewer is distracted by it, even if they're not consciously aware of being distracted by it. If it's so poor that the viewer is distracted by it, then you're not serving the message or emotional intent of your project, right? That's a problem. That's bad work. Bad work is also internally inconsistent, right? So an emotionally charged, like really, I don't know, sentimental stop motion piece about a girl who loses her father to alcoholism probably shouldn't have some slamming soundtrack by Skrillex. Like it just wouldn't. That's internally inconsistent. That's bad work. Now these are extreme examples. You know, usually it's not so clear. But we all kind of know bad work when we see it because of these things. So that creates a kind of like it's like a like I said before, negative space around what is good work now. So one thing I think you have to caveat, and this is a little bit of a tangent, and maybe I think you've talked about this before. I have to like say right off the bat that good work is not necessarily original. That like in the United States, at least, I don't know about the rest of the world, but we have this cult of originality, right? We worship innovation and novelty. Our economy is even dependent upon it, right? The perception that newer is better, always better. Right. And it's just not true, right? All creative work is a conglomeration of the past and the present. And there's really nothing truly original or new, especially in the space of design, because it's message-based communication. It's about communicating ideas and messages. So if you don't believe me, let's just by definition, this is true. And let me explain why. So let's think of language, like spoken language for just a moment. So like you and I are able to communicate with each other because we have a shared set of agreed upon conventions that we call the English language, right? We're speaking it now. So when I say tree, you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, you're talking about weed. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So if I say tree, you know what I mean. And if I say cut down the tree, you also know what I mean, right? Now, if I say garpelgok the tree, you're going to be confused because you're like, what the hell is garpelgok? And I'll say, it's an original word. I just made it up. Isn't it great? It's based on nothing before it. Meanwhile, my tree isn't getting cut down. So in the realm of art, where personal expression matters most, that's probably okay. That's fine. Maybe garpelgok means something to me personally. Maybe it resonates with a range of emotional tones or something that I want to convey. But for design, it's a failure, right? Because you've broken the language that we had, English, the shared language that we had, in the name of novelty, right? And design is a visual language. It uses shared conventions. Some of them are not consciously understood by the viewer, but they're still there and they're still very powerful. Some of those shared conventions are culturally specific. Some of them are just universal for all humans. So if I can continue my rant for just a little bit longer. So like,
keep going.
In the US, for example, right, we have a visual convention that we read from left to right. We don't read from right to left or top to bottom, as some people do in other cultures around the world, right? And that's a culturally specific visual convention. If you try to animate text from the right to the left, you're going to confuse your viewer and probably undermine the intent of your piece, right? It may be exciting and cool, but good luck to the reader, the viewer, who's actually trying to understand what the hell you're saying. An example of a universal convention for visual language will be something like contrast, right? The human eye is drawn towards areas of high contrast in a composition. It's a super powerful phenomenon. Good designers know how to use that convention, that understanding of contrast to create hierarchy and rhythm in their pieces, right? And so all too often, an attempt by designers to be original ignores the fact that we are speaking a visual language, and we need to work within that language to make our messages clear and impactful. Again, I'm talking about design, not art. Art, forget it. I don't know anything about art. I can't even talk intelligibly about it. But for design, the idea of a visual language is super important. So to circle back to what makes good work and originality and all that stuff, you have to acknowledge that you're working within a visual language. It's culturally specific. It's even temporally specific, right? There are certain, at any given moment in time, there are certain kind of shared visual conventions that you can work with or subvert that makes sense at that time. An example now would be emoji, right? 10 years ago, throwing emoji into an animation or any visual work would have confounded people. Why the hell do you have a smiley face, with its tongue out in the middle? What is that?
Right.
But now you can create entire sentences that are actually sometimes profound and complex with just emoji, right? That's it's good. And in 10 years, it may completely go away. But being aware of that visual language, that convention they're working within, is an important part of being an effective designer. Okay, rant over. Sorry about that.
Wow. Hold on. Let me let me just soak that in. Everyone who's listening, you just let your brain kind of percolate all that stuff like a little Plinko machine. That was intense, man. Thank you for that. So let me try to dissect some of this. So one of the things you said that really resonated with me, and we actually teach this at School of Motion. We have a course called Design Bootcamp, and a big component of that is not just design in the sense of like open Photoshop, put a font here, but also like coming up with ideas and things like that. Yeah. And one of the things that we stress to our students, because it's really daunting if you look at, for example, Motionographer, and you're looking at all the design on there, you're not looking at rookie design, right? You're looking at, sometimes you are, and you're looking at these like just phenoms that are really good at it right away. Most people, it takes a long time. And we preach the idea of competence before originality. If your work is super original for the sake of originality, like you just said, but it's not competent. You've decided you want to use 10 fonts all at the same time because you never see that, so it's going to stand out, right? No one's doing that. No one's doing that, and then you realize there's a very good reason you wouldn't do that. So that's one thing, and then the idea that originality is not in our industry. It's not. I've never seen that before, right? That, frankly, there might still be something like that out there, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, even the box piece that you mentioned before, just as a quick aside. Yeah. It looked so crazy original because you have a man who's interacting with a robot arm and, this projection mapped imagery. But then if you actually looked at the components of it, some of that stuff the KUKA arms had been used a lot before in motion graphics and also in film production. And then the the CG itself, G-Monk is incredible, but it looked a lot like stuff that Maxim Zevkov has been creating, Russian dude who's been creating black and white CG abstract stuff for like 15 years. And so you could kind of see the antecedents, if you just were honest with yourself and knew enough about, what had come before.
Of course. And I believe that G-Monk, he's got a little breakdown on his site, and he actually references him and shows some of his work that inspired him to do this. And so I guess what I'm getting at is that originality in our industry, it's more about remixing things.
Yes.
That was what G-Monk did with that piece. And then, going back to this Buck piece, the David Blaine thing, to me, it was just kind of, so there's certain things that blow me away because they are so novel feeling. Like the G-Monk thing felt new. The Buck thing doesn't feel new, though. It feels like they did that 5-6 years ago with the Good Books piece. It's almost identical to it in terms of the look and the vibe and the execution. But God damn it, it's so good. Yeah. So I have some theories I want to run past you. Yeah. And one of the things that I don't think gets talked about enough that elevates good work to great work. And it's kind of, I think it's kind of tough for us to admit sometimes because we're motion designers and we're making visuals, but it's the audio.
Yeah.
And the G-Monk piece had like this brilliant score. And I think if you watch either of those pieces without the audio, they're good. If you turn the audio on, they're great. And I'm curious, because I know like you do feature, you mentioned Ant Food on your site. I mean, frankly, Ant Food does like half the good work out there, or David Camp, or Cypher sounds like that. But like, do you think they get enough credit for making great work?
They don't. Yeah. And this is something that's bothered me for a while. I've wanted, because I used to make music and still do every now and then. I'm a big like music fan and sound design as well, which, by the way, they're two different things. So in case you're curious,
of course,
a lot of times sound designers do make music, but not always, right? So sound design is like the non-musical kind of enhancements or whatever, and then music is music. Ant Food does both, and they often have a way of weaving the two together seamlessly, which is really amazing. But so I've talked to a lot of people about this, sound designer friends and musicians and stuff. I wanted to actually create either an area of Motionographer or a whole new site that really gives sound design and music composition its due. But I don't have all much time to do that, and it's a whole new project. There have been other people who've done it. One person, I'm blanking. Oh, it might have been Alex Moulton, who used to do this for a living. He started something. I think it's dead now. That was a blog dedicated to sound design and music composition, specifically in kind of commercial and short form production. But I don't think in general that they get enough credit. And it starts, unfortunately, for sound designers and musicians, it starts with the project itself. A lot of times clients and agencies either forget to include sound in the budget, or it's like a tacked on item at the end. There's not a real appreciation for that component of the piece. I think what Buck has done by consistently partnering with Ant Food and I guess making that part of their negotiations when they do work, I don't know, but I'm assuming so because they work together on almost everything. That is fantastic because not only is Ant Food incredible at what they do, it allows Buck and Ant Food to then kind of develop chemistry and their own kind of, shorthand for how to work together. And so it makes the end product that much better, right? That much more kind of aligned emotionally. And that is huge. And I know some people who try to do that. They try to work with the same musicians and sound designers. At PSYOP, when I was at PSYOP, we tried to do that as much as we could. We were working on really big budget projects, though. And a lot of times when you get up to a certain budget number for a lot of commercial clients, there's not a nice way to say this. Some of the clients or the people, the agencies they call it star fucking. They want to sorry if it's a big F word.
I love that term. It's one of my favorite terms.
Yeah. So they think, oh, well, we could get, I don't know, Danny Elfman to do the music for this. Even if Danny Elfman isn't the right choice, right? Even if it makes more sense to have, John Black from Cypher Audio or somebody do it, they're going to go with Danny Elfman because of the star fucking thing. Or, that happens a lot with directors of commercials too, and so that can derail, the audio and really, limit who gets involved. But no, they're the unsung heroes of motion design. So much emotion comes from not just the audio, but the audio working with the visuals, and not watching pieces with audio is really doing a disservice to them as well. Anytime I look at work, I have my headphones on and cranked up.
Yeah, and I think too. So for me, because I in a previous life I was in a band and I've been a musician for years and years, and so for me, I always approached everything I did from the audio first, which I didn't really know why at the time. I was just comfortable doing it, but now in hindsight, I think what I liked about it and what I recognize in pieces I like the David Blaine one, is it lets you think about the pacing, the timing, and because good work has rests built into it. Yeah. You look at the Buck piece, the David Blaine thing. And by the way, everybody will link to all these in the show notes. So you'll be able to check them out. There's these moments where there's like these bursts of amazing animation, and if you just did that and then went right to the next thing, you wouldn't give the viewer any time to resonate. Right. And if you aren't working to a soundtrack, you had better be really, really good at sort of imagining the movie in your head and then making it in order to get those pauses. I think music helps kind of naturally create good pacing in motion work, which is one of the reasons I think, this was kind of my theory I was getting to, which is why when Buck has to do a 30-second commercial and they have to cram everything the client wants into it, no matter how beautiful and flawlessly executed it is, it does not resonate the way something that can be 1 minute, 17 seconds can be. Because that's
a really good point. If you look at the work that has kind of been most widely celebrated of theirs, I would argue it doesn't fit in the traditional 30 or 60-second box. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with the G-Monk piece. I mean, there were these crazy visual moments, and then the camera would pan down to the floor for 5 seconds, and you'd rest, and the music would die down right at that point. So that's one of the things, and where I'm kind of going with this was, sometimes I wonder if when. And we can bring in another studio because we've been kissing Buck's ass, rightfully so. So let's bring in, I don't know, let's say like a Giant Ant's another one of my favorites, right? When they're working on something that's going to end up being, a classic piece, do you think they know it when they're happening, or is it only in hindsight that they realize, whoa, that came out really good?
I think, talking to people about this for years, I think that the experienced people and experienced studios know when they're onto something. They know when they're doing something that's great for whatever reason. That, by the way, that doesn't mean that they know it's going to get attention and universal praise and win awards, because that's a whole different set of skills. That's self-promotion, that's community involvement, that's marketing, that's different stuff. But I think that experienced designers and studios know when they're making something good. They know when they're onto something, and that, I think, that comes from, well, if we can think about inexperienced designers and studios, this is something I have to deal with a lot in Motionographer, but inexperienced designers and studios often think they're creating something amazing.
Right.
But they lack the perspective to really see their work clearly against the backdrop of history, against the backdrop of their own work, against the backdrop of, the current landscape of, visual language and trends and whatever else is going on there. It just, when you're inexperienced, you lack that perspective. And I think that, the more experienced studios have that perspective just from, going to battle so many times. And so they know when they're making something good. I think a lot of times they do. Now, the time when I think people don't know if they're making something amazing is if it has a really long timeline. I've seen this happen a lot where So for instance, like people who work on experiential work, those timelines can be really long. 18 months is not unusual for, a semi-permanent installation piece that's going to, live somewhere for a while. And you really do lose perspective. It's hard to see the forest for the trees when you've like been hacking away at the same branch for, 6 months or something. So that I think is hard no matter how experienced you are. It's hard to kind of, maintain perspective.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that we really try to get our students to develop as soon as they can is the ability to self-critique. Because, I mean, everybody has to go through this phase where the work you're able to execute is like far less polished than the work you can visualize in your head. I think there's that brilliant Ira Glass quote about the gap, and that's kind of what it is. And what I found is that, if you just get in the habit of looking at work all the time, eventually you'll kind of develop this sixth sense of like, okay, I know what I'm doing feels good, but it doesn't look right. And it's tough for studios too, because I've been in the position of being creative director at a studio and working for 6 months on something and hoping maybe this one will get on Motionographer. And sometimes that desire and that like aspiration to do great work overrides like being realistic. It's like, you know what? Yeah, like it's a great design, it's a great animation, but it's for a bank, like it's not going to resonate,
Yeah, that's true. Just understanding, and again, this goes back to what is good design. And it's basically something that is helping a message, come across clearly and with as much emotional impact as is appropriate. And so if you let the desire to be posted on Motionographer or something drive your decisions, it's a good chance it's going to screw you up, right? Because what needs to be driving your decisions, what needs to be driving your decisions is this the best thing for the client or for the project at hand, for what I'm trying to say here. And, it's worth saying that like a lot of the people that I think of as rock stars who just consistently produce incredible work, they're humble about it. When they send us something, they're like, hey, I finished this. They don't assume that we're going to post it. And by the way, us posting it doesn't mean that, it's like we're like the end all be all. It's just what we like,
right.
And they understand that too. They understand that we're just one voice in a crowd of many, and all those voices are valuable and valid. So they understand all that. We have this on our site. If you go to motionographer.com/process, we have a list of, kind of loose criteria that we don't go down the list and ask ourselves, all these questions that are on that page, but they are in the back of our minds. And I think it can be helpful if you look at those things. It can be helpful about helping you critique your own work and understand like the larger context in which you're creating stuff.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice. You kind of don't let the tail wag the dog. Like if you do work, using the right mindset and trying to make your clients, as successful as you can because they're paying you to. Yeah. Or if you have a vision and you're working on a personal project, just be true to that. And if you are, you have a better chance of getting on Motionographer. And one of the things I want to ask you about too, kind of in that regards, Justin, is a lot of that kind of that sentiment of like, oh, I hope I get on Motionographer. That's kind of out of your control. But now there's going to be an award show. And I imagine it's going to be a big deal to win a Motion Award.
I hope so.
And so I'm, or maybe not. Maybe it'll be like the prize you get in a Happy Meal. But hopefully it's a big deal. And so my question is, are awards really? Because people are going to make them seem very important in their mind. Are awards, you think, still relevant today? Because it used to be that, award shows and things like Stash, they kind of served to fill a hole that was, how do I discover new content? Now there's a million ways to do that. You've got Vimeo feeds and you've got Art of the Title and you've got Motionographer and Wine After Coffee. So what does the award show do that all of those things don't?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think we went through a whole cycle here where, you had this kind of institutions and then social media kind of challenged those institutions. It's like, look, you can, go direct to the source and find it, here on Vimeo or whatever. And then because that became so popular, those streams of golden content soon became like raging rivers of just mud. And so it's like the good thing, it was too much of a good thing, right?
Yeah.
So now it's like we're just drowning in amazing stuff. And I think now more than ever, it's important to have an award show to create a space for people to go, okay, wait, hang on just a second. There's been a whole bunch of stuff created in the past, 12 months or whatever. What's the stuff that really sticks? What's the stuff that we really want to remember and that we really want to hold up? And you can't do that on social media. By definition, you can't. You can say it and it'll just get buried in the feed within 15 seconds.
Right.
So an award show is a way to create that kind of like permanent space, kind of a quiet space where you can hold these things up. There's also, I think there's a historical value too to having an award show year after year after year, which we plan on doing for decades, is, you can look back and see clear kind of changes in visual conventions and even, in technology and those kind of things that you can't just, social media is terrible at looking back. If you don't believe me, try to find something that you posted, 8.5 weeks ago on Facebook or Twitter. It's impossible. And so this is, again, a way to kind of preserve some sense of clarity. And so I think it's more important than ever. And there's also, so that's the kind of like big aspirational thing about why I think the Motion Awards are going to be important and why award shows in general are still important. But then there's also the practical benefit is that studios still get work and recognition from clients and agencies through award shows. Because while we all are kind of constantly in this world, right? We know who's hot and, who's the greatest, blah, blah, blah. That's because we breathe it and live it every day. But the people who are paying the bills in many cases don't. They have whole other worlds that they're involved in, and they can't go dipping their toe in their Vimeo feeds and hope to find anything valuable there. They also don't even necessarily know what good is, right? We're talking about a client that's not worked in the space much before, but they know they need motion design to help communicate something. They need some help, and award shows are incredibly effective at that. They're basically a way of saying, look, this, kind of big group of peers said that these people or this person is doing amazing work. You start here. Check this out first. Then if you want to go, diving down the rabbit hole of Vimeo, at least now you're kind of going in, you're not going in blind. You've got something to judge against or to use as a standard against which you can measure what you're trying to do.
I think you're totally right. I think, studios that win Motion Awards, that's going to be a press release that they send to all their clients. I mean, it's going to be a big deal. And so I could see a huge value for, obviously the big studios, it'll be helpful to them. But I think even for smaller studios or newer studios, like, Oddfellows or, Erica Gorchow's Pep Rally, like if they win a Motion Award, that's really helping their bottom line. But is that who this award show is for? Is it just for, like, is it going to end up being dominated by all the names we've already heard because they're the ones capable of, putting 12 cell animators on something for 6 months? Is that going to end up being the case, or do you think,
Yeah, there's a lot to be said there. I think for to start, putting 12 animators on a project for 6 months does not guarantee good work. There's a lot of people who can do that, and in the end, it creates crap.
Right.
So what's really happening at Buck is you've got just really talented people holding the reins who know how to guide people. And that can happen at a small team or a big team. It can happen in a young studio or an older studio. Just depends on the people who are on something. So I don't think, necessarily you have to have a big team. If you look at Motionographer's homepage right now, I'd say more than half of the work on there was created by really small teams, sometimes 2 to 3 people, sometimes just one person, not counting the audio component. And so so with the awards, we're trying to build in some inclusivity there to make sure that there are enough spotlights. So we have, in some of the categories, we have a solo category. So like There, you can enter in commercial, in the commercial category, you can enter a solo project, which means you created this thing pretty much by yourself. Maybe you had some people, kind of chipping in here and there, and somebody did the audio for you, but you pretty much made it by yourself. There's a solo category in the commercial group. There's a solo category in visual essay explainer group, and there's one in I'm missing one. Short form, because a lot of people create short form work by themselves. And then also in the student category, there's a solo award as well. So we're trying to bake it in, But I also think you're going to see. I think you're going to see a whole range of work. I don't know. I'm not judging. By the way, I'm not a judge for the Motion Awards. So, we're going to have to wait and see. Again, we chose the 120 people that we chose because they're not all going to reinforce the status quo necessarily, right? Some of them are going to challenge it. And so I guess we'll wait and see. I know that it's one of our goals to include as much, range as possible. But, ultimately the best work is going to win according to the judges, and we'll see what they say.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see, and I can understand you're not a judge because you probably have enough on your plate already.
Yeah.
And I do hope, because one of the things that we have a very big alumni group, and most of them are working as like the only motion designer at their little job, their place of business, or they're freelance or something like that. They're kind of these solo artists, and when you look at I know the Motionographer, I think it really does an amazing job of showing a lot of different styles. But a lot of the pieces that get passed around that really like blow everyone's mind, they have what I kind of call the big studio look, where as good as the software is getting, cell animation is still insanely labor intensive, and being a hardcore 3D shop like Blur or Ike Sponza requires these basically an IT department level of expertise, and people with different kind of realms of expertise like texturing and modeling and things like that. And it becomes harder and harder for a single person or even two people to pull that look off, because the studios don't stop getting better either. They keep improving too. So I'm curious, are there styles, that you think a solo artist or a small two-person shop could do that would let them win a Motion Award? I mean, I guess I want to leave people with, like, if you're out there listening to this and you're like, I want a Motion Award, but I'm just me, and I cannot do cell animation like Buck can.
Right.
What's the thing that's going to help them stand out?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have to play to your strengths, and that goes with if you're an individual or if you're a studio. You got to know what your strengths are and play to them. And again, that takes a little bit of experience to even know what your strengths might be. So if if you're a studio that really has been passionate about creating photoreal abstract CG work, but you think that cell animation is how you're going to get attention, you're already going down a bad path, right? It's not gonna work out.
Gonna have a bad day.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Ultimately, you have to play your strengths, and also, make sure that the work you're creating again is kind of creating that emotional impact and aligning with the message that you're trying to get across. So, I get the kind of feeling that it's just like big studio look, but yet I see so many mind-blowing things created by individuals, whether it be on Instagram or Motionographer or whatever, that I think everybody has a shot, not only at the Motion Awards of winning a Motion Award. I really do think everybody has a shot, provided their work is up to a certain level. But I also think in general, people have a shot to stand out. I mean, some of the work that has been, if you want to look at like what's been popular and what's kind of had viral success, right? You can find some crazy examples of work that doesn't fit any traditional definition of quality. One I'm thinking of right now is, I can't remember what it's called. It's a weird animated short about a baseball player who pitched a no-hitter while he was tripping acid on acid. You remember that? Remember that film that came out? It came out a few years ago, and there's been a follow-up one we posted on Motionographer. And it's one dude. Now, he interviewed some people for it, but it's one guy who created it, and it's by James Blagden. It's the guy, and it's, there's a quality to it, kind of a naivete to the style of it. But it's one guy, and that thing has been viewed millions upon millions of times. There's always a way to kind of look at an old problem in a new way, and you don't have to have a team of animators or designers behind you to do that. Anybody can do that. Look at Yule Log, the project that Daniel Savage launched, the collaborative project that he launched a few years ago. Now there's studios involved in it, but if you look at some of the earlier ones, like it's just one person creating, a little sequence for this collaborative animation project. And man, some of the best stuff I saw that year was in Yule Log. And so, I think people have to ask themselves, like, again, what are they really trying to achieve, and how can they play to their strengths to achieve it? And that's going to give you your best shot.
That's awesome. I think it's a really exciting time to be getting into motion design, because I remember getting into it probably around the same time you did, when it was kind of the domain of these wizards that, they were the only ones that knew how to do this stuff, and, Renaissance and MK12 and all them. And now you can learn how to do anything. And the question now really becomes, what do you do? which is much harder.
Yeah, it is. It is exciting. Like, so much of the work is shifting to freelancers, individuals, and small groups. And there's just an enormous opportunity there. And there's a drying up of work at the higher end of the spectrum. It's worth remembering too that, like, people like Buck and Giant Ant, they have so much work that I'm guessing they don't post on their website.
Of course.
Work that pays the bills, and that keeps the lights on, and they decide, all right, we're gonna go all in this one and lose some money on it and do it for fun, and so of course that's gonna make them look like they're just always sitting out of the park. But there's a whole bunch of stuff you're not seeing from every studio or individual out there. But that stuff is important, and that's what keeps you going and keeps the lights on. And there's so much opportunity now for that kind of work. And then, if you get a steady stream of that going, you can then do whatever you want with the freedom that affords you. So Erica Gorchow, who you mentioned earlier, is a really good example. Like, she works, she does client jobs, and, maybe she likes how it turns out, maybe she doesn't. But then she takes the money that she gets from that, and she puts it into projects that she cares about. She's becoming politically active, so she's got some projects that she's able to work with friends on and spend time on. And she can try it up. She made a game for iOS. There's no money to be made in that, really. But it's something she wanted to do, and she was able to do because she went after, strategically went after some of the work that is pays well and is coming out now. All the needs for content are just so huge. There's a great opportunity there, and she didn't pass it up.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, that's my philosophy: is one for the meal, one for the real. I think that's how you do it. Yeah, and I remember chatting with Ryan Honey at Blend last year, and I forget what the percentage was, but I think he said something like, what you see on Buck's website is like 10% of the work they do. So even Buck, there's like a basement somewhere at Buck with a bunch of really shiny turds in it.
Exactly. It was the same at PsyOp when I was there. And that work is really, it's funny too, because that work often informs the big, rock star work, because you learn stuff, you learn efficiencies and learn new tools and stuff from the work that you get paid to do that comes back around, But I think it's like people who feel like every project they make has to be, buck level, oh man, that's just, you're going to set yourself up for burnout and failure and just disappointment.
Exactly.
It's a balance. It's a cycle. Yeah.
Well, I think people should take that advice and save their goods up for the Motion Awards. So, yeah. Justin, if someone wants to learn more about the Motion Awards, are there any URLs or dates you could share at this time?
Yeah. So go to motionawards.com. And if you get there before December 13th, you can sign up to get notifications via email about, everything that's going to be happening. Motionawards.com. That's also, the website for the awards. So on December 13th, we'll be opening the call for entries. And there's going to be an early bird period that'll save you about $50 per entry. So I recommend getting entries in sooner rather than later. The early bird period is going to run from December 13th to, I think, January 6th. And there's different price points. I won't be able to explain all that in the podcast without confusing people. Solo projects are cheaper. The student entries are obviously the cheapest, and the solo projects are cheaper. And then there's a kind of professional level for studios and stuff. It's our entry fees are below the industry average. We're trying to keep them as low as we can. So everybody should get their work in as early as they can. We'll probably have some discounts and stuff for patrons. We haven't figured out how we're going to do that. So if you're interested in, becoming a supporter on patreon.com, go to patreon.com/motionographer, sign up and you'll get updates from there too. But I think that's it for now in terms of plugging stuff.
Cool. And the work that can be submitted, it just has to be done by the end of 2016?
Anytime in 2016. It went online or on air in anytime in 2016.
Perfect. So if anyone out there is listening, you have a few more weeks in 2016.
There's a category for you. I'm sure there's 22 categories, I think, across 7 different areas. So all that stuff will be on the website. It's not there now, but it'll be on there soon.
Awesome.
Patrons, our Patreon people, our Patreon supporters have actually already gotten a sneak peek. So they know all the judges, they know all the categories. So that's one of the perks of being a patron on our Patreon campaign.
Yeah. And I would highly recommend anyone who frequents Motionographer, go become a patron, because you do get a little peek behind the kimono, and it's really fascinating. And you do get pretty much direct access to the leadership at Motionographer, which, is helpful if you want to influence the direction the industry is going. And one last thing, Justin, when are the Motion Awards?
So the winners are going to be announced in April, which for those who are paying attention, April is historically when we have held the F5 festival. F5 won't be happening in 2017. But there is a strategic alignment of those dates, and I won't say any more for right now. Interesting. Awesome, dude. All right. Well, I personally cannot wait to actually judge some of these things. Yeah, that's right. You're going to be, I think we have you in the student category. And by the way, students, if you completed an online program like Design Bootcamp or, any of the School of Motion programs, that's valid. That works. You're a student. And so you can enter projects for those courses in the Motion Awards. That is excellent. I saw Michael Jones on the list too. So a little shout out to MoGraph Mentor. Those guys are our buddies too. That's awesome. It's going to be a lot of fun, man. And I'm sure everyone's really excited to submit work and then sit there in April with their fingers crossed, hoping for their golden ticket. I'm super curious to see how it's all going to go. I'm just as curious as everybody else. So the more work that's in there, the better it's going to be for all of us as an industry. So let's do it. Awesome, man. Well, dude, thank you again for hopping on. This was awesome. I think there was this kind of went all over the place, but there's a lot of really interesting a lot of coffee, profound things you said in there, and I hope people get a lot out of it. So that's it, man. Thank you. We'll do this again soon. Thank you so much, man. Cool. Thank you. I want to say thanks again to Justin for coming on and chatting with me. He is an awesome guy, and, Motionographer has been a source of inspiration for me and for everyone else for a long time, and it is his baby, and he has managed it extremely well, and I cannot wait to see what the next 10 years bring for Motionographer. And if you're in that same boat, go to patreon.com/motionographer, and for the love of God, pledge $5 a month. Will ya? It's a cup of coffee. Motionographer does a lot, not just for the readers who
you like to get on it and find out what's new and exciting and what's cool looking, Motionographer does a lot for the industry, attracting new talent, teaching people about motion design. It does a lot more than simply giving you something to look at while you're drinking coffee in the morning. Also, if you want more information about the Motion Awards, go to motionawards.com, and starting December 13th, you'll actually be able to submit work for consideration in the first ever Motion Awards. Judges will be announced the same day, and as Justin mentioned, there are 120 of them, of which I am one. So if you would like to bribe me, joey@schoolofmotion.com, I take cash, and you have until March to submit your work. All the work must have been completed in 2016, and the awards will actually be in April. So at some point in April, there's going to be the first crop of Motion Award winners. It's really exciting. I think it's going to be huge. So go to motionawards.com, sign up for the email list so you can get notified and get all the information, especially that early submission discount that Justin mentioned. So that's it. I want to say thank you for listening. Go to schoolofmotion.com for show notes and all the other good stuff we have to offer, and I will catch you on the next one.